Hi all, I just want to let you know that we will begin our webinar in about 4 minutes. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you to everyone who has joined us so far. I just want to let you know that we will begin in 1 minute. Thank you. Okay, hello all, it's 1:30, so we'll go ahead and get started. If our panelists could put their videos back on and their mics, we'll go ahead and get going. So welcome to our Thursday after lunch webinar IT series. My name is Kirsten Patton and I'm the working group manager here at ATARC. Today we are going to talk about the role of remote work, productivity, and collaborative work management and how it plays into addressing these evolving needs in this dynamic economy, especially during this time of uncertainty. So first of all, I'd like to say welcome to all of our attendees, and I would like to give a special thanks to Shauna Wu and Chris Ahern and the rest of the Smartsheets team because they have been really excellent partners. This afternoon, we're going to hear from our panelists, followed by a Q&A where we'll pop up a poll question or two, and we will answer any questions that you all might have. So to get going, I would like to introduce our panelists. We have Bill Hunt, who is the Chief Enterprise Architect at the Small Business Administration. We have Jerry Kieran, who is the Director of Enterprise Network Management at Department of State. Mike Vandewood, who is the founder of MVW Consultants. Mike is also a former GSA Senior Advisor to Supply Chain Risk. And we also have Chris Ahern, who is the RVP of Federal Sales over at Smartsheet. So to begin our webinar, I would like to hear from each of our panelists and as far as their perspectives on the topic. Bill Hunt, would you mind kicking us off with some of your thoughts?
Sure thing. Thanks for having me. It's always good to be back here at ATARC. Full disclaimer, of course, I'm also on the board and run the cloud working group, so I am obliged to be here, but I'm always happy to be here as well. Good working with you, Kirsten. So hi, everybody. My name is Bill Hunt. I'm the Chief Enterprise Architect at SBA. Obviously, SBA has been a little busy lately. As you all probably heard in the news, Congress tasked us with giving out hundreds of billions of dollars in small business loans. For a lot of people, it's probably the first time you're hearing that SBA actually is a bank. In addition to our efforts in certifying small businesses and giving advice, we give out small business loans, both just to get businesses started and keep them going, but also during emergencies. We have a big disaster relief component to the work that we do. So generally speaking, you know, if FEMA shows up in a disaster area, we show up a couple of days later and start giving out small business loans to keep the economy going. Obviously, COVID-19 has presented a unique set of challenges and opportunities for everyone involved. It's one of the unique national disasters we've had where it pretty much affected everyone everywhere simultaneously in the entire country. And that is in itself a series of challenges. So SBA has been really maximizing our usage of technology and cloud to really be able to keep our team up and working when we can't even be in our buildings. And in addition to that, we've also been scaling up and ramping up our staff dramatically. SBA is the biggest little CFO act agency. You know, we only are about 2,000 people usually, but during an emergency, we'll increase our staff dramatically. So we've scaled up and added about 5,000 people in just a few short weeks. So for us, being able to maximize using things like cloud technologies to be able to keep our staff up and running and working has been really useful. But I'll also say that the other side of this is not just technology. The other side of it is really culture. Having an organization that has a remote first sort of culture is really critical. You know, before I came to government, I spent about 20 years in the private sector running teams, software engineering teams, et cetera. And most of that was doing things like follow the sun coverage and being geographically distributed all over the world. And so as a result, you know, really learning those lessons about how you have a remote first culture and building your teams around the sort of collaboration skills that are necessary to be able to really be productive is critical. And I'm looking forward to chatting with everybody a bit more about that today.
Awesome, thank you. Mike, could you please go next?
Sure, happy to join. So it's been an interesting time. And as Kirsten mentioned, I recently retired from GSA, which is a GSA. GSA is a telework agency. So it's not new to GSA what we've been experiencing. It's been, so I've been in the industry quite a long time, former CIO on Wall Street and all that. So I was kind of opposed to teleworking. It's just, you know, an exercise that I was raised through, et cetera. So I find value in meeting people in hallways or et cetera in the buildings and just that kind of atmosphere. However, when in the last 3 years with GSA, I've gotten a whole new perspective for a couple of things. One is I lived in Charlottesville, Virginia, and going to 1800 F Street in DC is about a 2-hour drive if I leave at 4:30 in the morning. But nevertheless, that experience, I found myself being a lot more productive working remotely. In the last 3 months, just prior to leaving GSA, with supply chain risk, I was on 5 DHS committees, anything from threat management to all kinds of evaluation on qualified bidders and counterfeiting, et cetera. And all of these calls, 50% industry, 50% agencies represented on these calls, found them to be very productive, very intuitive, and with the latest in technologies with conferencing, whether it be Zoom or WebEx or whatever. Teams is up, Teams is now very competitive with Zoom. We find ourselves in a whole different relationship with our clients and with our businesses, and better communication, and actually being more productive. So I'm going to give you some interesting statistics. So the average commute across America is 27 minutes for people. In Washington, D.C., it happens to be 43 minutes. That's one way each way. That's the average commute. So if you take that time and look at what people spend on average, let me see, that some other statistics is that one third of travel, 45 minutes, is more to the is added to the workday every day. So that's one stat. Then there was a stat from I forget which of the agencies or one of the studies is, but it's 3.6 million or percent of the workforce has been working half time or more from home. That goes back to 2016. So Gallup in 2016 said 43% of the workforce at home works at home at least some of the time. So what they mean by that is that when you're home, you're doing emails. It's not certified time that expected. It's just what you do when you're home. You're either checking emails, making phone calls, getting updates on projects and things like that. Not really certified time. That was 43% in 16. So again, Inc. magazine I read this morning states that it's closer to 62% between 2017, 2018. So more people are taking advantage of the technology, and more people are doing some work, telework, vis-a-vis either telephony or, in fact, conference calls, or now Zoom or Teams, etc. 80% of the people would like to do some teleworking. That's, the latest stat is that 80% of the people think that they can do some teleworking from home. So one of the biggest holdbacks from teleworking, as I mentioned, is managers have, they like to see butts in seats. They want to be able to see the people that are there. It's lack of trust or babysitting people. So that, as the older workforce, like myself, gradually migrates off the picture, and the younger workforce who's been raised in all this telecommuting, I think that structure is changing. COVID-19 is going to move that a lot quicker than what the plan was. So one of the other things I want to talk about is what's forthcoming, what's going to help that. So there's a lot of conversation on the 5th generation communications, 5G, right? So that is going to incrementally make things faster, a lot faster, give you a lot more capacity, and it'll just make things quicker response time. So there's a lot of things about moving to the cloud and latency and all that stuff. When you start with 5G, that is going to change it even more profound than what it is. So I would say that teleworking is going to be, if anything, going to move a lot quicker, and as a result of COVID-19, than what was originally in the plan. So teleworking actually works. People will be more productive. The employee is happier. You're going to see more effectiveness from the employees. So I think it's incrementally going to add. As I say, my youngest daughter starts a new position on Monday with T. Rowe Price, graduate, et cetera, and she starts teleworking. And T. Rowe Price has actually said that they may change the whole architecture in the way that they're working. In fact, they may change the whole business to where teleworking becomes the profound statement of doing that. That'll have a significant, if all these companies do that, watch the real estate in major cities. It's going to create a major cavity. So that whole infrastructure will begin to see changes in major cities and outlying areas. Anyway, interesting times, and thank you very much.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you for sharing those statistics, and it's interesting how all these things play into one another. All right, so our next panelist, Jared Kieran, he is not on video right now because he's at his office, but Jared, could you please share with us some of your perspectives on this?
Yeah, I'm in the office, so I can't say much about telework myself, can I? No, happy to be here. Thanks for having me. Yeah, my name is Gerald Kieran. I work at the Department of State. I am the Director for Enterprise Network Management. So basically, I do a lot of the infrastructure from the network to the perimeter, Active Directory, and all those things. And all those played a major part in the success of our telework. As you may or may not know, we have 275 embassies worldwide, plus many domestic facilities. So there was quite a challenge as other countries were in different phases from what we were in the DC Metro. Some countries were coming back, so people were getting back to work. So we had all kinds of different phases. But the success that we had, I think, in migrating to the cloud early on played a huge part in our telework, where we were able to, at some point, be up to 93% teleworking for the department, which is pretty extraordinary, thinking about all the users that we have worldwide, as well as some of the challenges that we had to do. One of the things that we found definitely was, from a security perspective, you know, we changed our attack surface by moving to a large contingent of people teleworking. Therefore, we had to take that under account, and a lot of, you know, some risk was accepted. But if we want to continue those things, we'll have to revisit, you know, the security aspects of those. So that's something that we have to do. The other thing that I think we experienced was also the training. We tried to do a lot of training on cloud, how to leverage the cloud, but when people were in the office, they were not, you know, necessarily using that the same way as they would when they were teleworking. So there was a lot of training on the fly, for instance, to get people to leverage the tools in a more collaborative fashion. And there's been a lot of successes around that. So there was a lot of behind the scenes things going on, like increasing capacities at the firewall for the VPN type solutions, turning on browser-based access for those, and, you know, to allow even from a personal mobile. But as I said, you know, the security aspect of that was very challenging, as we need to be able to monitor those things. They can't control a personal device, so we still have some things to look at. But all in all, I think we were able to keep the department's mission moving forward in a very unique situation in a very short time frame.
Great, thank you, Jerry. And last but not least, we have Chris, who is going to share some slides with us as well. Chris, you are on mute, just so you know.
Not anymore. So sorry about that. Can you see the slides?
Yes, we can.
Great. Well, first off, I'd like to thank ATARC for pulling this panel together, and thank the panelists for participating today. When you do these panels, it's always great to go last, because most of the good material has already been taken. But I think since Smartsheet is coming at this from a little bit different angle than what the government folks are coming at it from, hopefully I can provide some insights that are helpful for folks. For those of you who don't know Smartsheet or are not familiar with us, we are a global company. We have 83,000 customers in 190 different countries, and about 90% of Fortune 100 companies are Smartsheet customers. And over the past couple of years, we've made significant inroads into the federal government. We're fortunate to have a number of customers, and we're doing all the things necessary to play in the federal space. We're FedRAMP approved, and we're pending right now for our IL4 approval to operate in DoD. We're available on common GWAC contracts like GSA Schedule and NASA SOUP, and we're also building out a local team here in DC that caters specifically to the needs of the federal market. And obviously, over the past several months, a number of our customers have been impacted by everything going on with the pandemic and the massive shift from working primarily in offices to working remotely. And I would just say, as an outsider looking in from the outside, I think the shift in transition the government underwent has been nothing short of miraculous, amazing, inspiring. I don't know all the right adjectives to put on it, but to take that big a workforce and move that quickly. I remember about a week before the stay-at-home order in Virginia, I was talking with the gentleman at the Pentagon, and the impending work order was coming down, and he said, yeah, this building doesn't work well remotely. This will be interesting, were the words that he said to me. And now the Pentagon has shifted 900,000 workers to working remotely, which is, again, is miraculous. I think, in some cases, the modernization efforts had paid off. Mike mentioned at GSA that they were already in that mode of working. I think for other agencies, there was emergency funding that became available that helped them as well. And you saw a lot of things along the lines of new network capacity, new collaboration tools, more video conferencing, more cyber tools, as Gerald was mentioning. And some of the statistics around it, I think, are remarkable. I mean, not only is the majority of the workforce teleworking, with the exception of Gerald, he's in the 2%, but the majority of them feel like they're getting more done and they have more time to work, which to me is a success by every indication. Some of the examples that I've either read about or, with customers that we work directly with, looking at Veterans Benefits Administration and Social Security Administration, they found, and I don't know that this was intentional or that they thought this was going to happen, but in terms of reducing their caseloads, they've actually been performing better in the work at home environment than having everybody go into the office. We talked about the Pentagon. I mean, nothing, again, short of miraculous in terms of moving that many folks that are used to working in an office home and continuing to be effective. On the innovation side, one of the cooler projects we were involved in a very small way was out at NASA Jet Propulsion Lab, where a number of satellite engineers were sent home and couldn't work on satellites and those sorts of things. And they got together and decided they wanted to do something to help, and started with a blank slate, and 37 days later designed a ventilator that was very specific to the COVID symptoms, and also needed 1/6 the parts that a standard ventilator utilized. They've since licensed that out to 8 companies who are going to produce that. So some of the anecdotal evidence, I think, of how the government has adapted is absolutely remarkable. I think as leaders think about what it's going to look like as we go back to work, right? And you look at the proliferation of Teams and video conferencing and more messaging and all those sorts of things. I think there's a double-edged sword that people were starting to realize prior to the pandemic that we've gone from having fewer systems to perhaps having too many. And that old axiom of, hey, there's an app for that, sometimes at work isn't necessarily the best thing, right? And workers are distracted and dealing with too many emails and those sorts of things. And some of the survey material sort of shows that workers feel a little more disconnected and informed, even though a lot of those tools are meant to make people more productive. And at Smartsheet, I think what we've realized, right, in the workplace that people are going to go back to is probably different than the one that they left. Work now is is highly fluid. It's mostly unstructured. And basically that means, for the most part, employers don't provide the IT resources that people actually need to do their jobs. They have to cobble it together with Excel or Word or PowerPoint or whatever they have there. There's a lot more citizen building of applications and capabilities than there was in the past. In the government, work is much more distributed. Working across agencies or with industry partners is a lot more common. And then, one thing we definitely learned through COVID, and we're still learning, right? I mean, the next phase of this is people going back to work, right? And what's the agility that you have to be able to kind of design those processes and create the workflows that you need to do something that you've never done before, right? Just as the government, and for large part, had never gone to teleworking on such a large scale. Now they haven't come back on such a large scale, and they're going to have to figure out how they operate there. So I think, some of the questions that leaders are going to need to ask as they look at kind of all these new systems they have and they put in place and people have gotten used to working with are what are the intended and unintended benefits that you're going to get from these. I would just note that the analysts, and this has been going on for a couple of years now, we're in a space called collaborative work management, which really deals with some of these phenomenons. And I won't go too deep into it, but certainly if you look up collaborative work management or Google it or check with Gartner, you'll find Gartner or Forrester or any of the other analysts, you'll find significant kind of data on how you improve actually getting work done and being more effective in this new environment we're in. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing those slides with us and sharing your perspective. I think right now would probably be a good time for a poll. Alyssa, could you please put that up for us? Great. So if everyone could take just a couple seconds to answer Alyssa's poll, that would be awesome. Okay, Alyssa, do you think it's time to show the results now? Very interesting. What do the panelists feel about the results? Do you think it aligns with what you expected?
Yeah, I mean, this generally reflects, I think, what are the same issues that we're seeing, in our agency, and I've heard anecdotally from my colleagues at other agencies. I think for a lot of staff that this is their first time teleworking as federal staff, it's been a bit of a shift, but most people are enjoying the flexibilities that can go along with it. So I'd say that the satisfaction kind of matches what I would expect here. And again, for people who are already used to that, like our colleagues at GSA over there, again, it's just kind of status quo for them. You're already used to it. It's already built in. And as to the second part, I think collaboration, communication, these are constant issues in an agency on a good day, much less when you can't actually be physically around the other people. So, I mean, this matches exactly what I would expect to see.
Absolutely. Anyone else want to chime in on that?
It's Mike Vanderwood. I agree. I think that I'm not surprised by the responses, and I actually think it'll grow more. I think that there are some agencies, such as the DoD, right? I think that violently opposed to it at the beginning, and I think that if you look at it now and the responses, they're significantly better. It's the productivity. The ability to do work from home without the commute. I mean, you save lots of time and it makes you happier at work, more productive. So I think that the results are good and probably will improve.
Yeah, like you said at the beginning, you had a change of heart. So maybe that's how other folks are starting to feel, realizing that they can do just as much work, if not more. Working.
Yeah, I think the shortcomings that you saw there in terms of collaboration and communication, and Bill, you touched on this. I mean, I think having a culture of transparency, particularly when you've sort of been taken out of the aquarium and, okay, now you're in a completely different environment. And if you're not used to the transparency the ways of keeping people up to date and things like that, then you tend to revert back to, oh, let's have a Zoom call so we can get updates on the status of certain things. Whereas, I think a lot of agencies, that are used to remote working have gotten past that.
Yeah, not to filibuster on that topic too much here, but I mean, to me, that's one of the cornerstones of really being successful at having a remote environment. To be remote first means that you're not having to necessarily check in with everybody every 5 minutes. To Mike's point, you don't need butts in seats to get things done, right? At the end of the day, good leadership should trust that they've hired people that they can trust, that are going to do their jobs, regardless of whether or not you're leaning over their shoulder and looking at every click that they make. And that's just not an effective way to run an organization. Moving towards a more of a decentralized model where people can keep track of their progress, their status, look at the movement of projects in a way that's, visual without having to have, a 15-minute dialogue about it is really critical. Sometimes you do need to have those, daily stand-ups and whatnot, to check in, see how your projects are running and go through some of the blockers. And I also think it's really good for team cohesion, to have that sort of check-in. But it's way more important just to have at a glance information. One thing that we've been really successful at SBA is, with all of the moving projects we have right now, trying to get these PPP loans out, et cetera, that everybody's been hearing about, has really been having a single source of truth, a single place where people can come and check in and find the status of all of those moving projects, all of the distributions, all of the, standing up of new infrastructure. So at a glance, leadership can understand what's going on very easily and effectively. And that's just been critical for us to be able to get things done. And, I'll say one little extra bit before I give up the stage, and that's the more check-ins you have, the less productive you're going to be. I know that people don't want to hear that. But the video collaboration is fantastic, and having all of these, extra tools to be able to chat with each other, that's fine and dandy, but really people need time to get their work done. And if you're just having call after call, meeting after meeting, it doesn't matter if you're in the office or if you're remote, you're not going to be productive. You really have to have realistic expectations that people need time to do work. And the more interruptions, the more chat messages pop up. I think Mike mentioned that, it takes like 45 minutes to get back to your train of thought when you're interrupted. Every single one of those interruptions is going to slow down and ruin your productivity. So, you really have to kind of set some reasonable expectations that, hey, staff are going to be unavailable for this 2 or 3 hour block each day. And during that time, they're going to do their jobs, and being able to have that sort of a culture and an expectation for people to say, you're going to have to step back. I need to do my job right now. I'll come back to you and we can have a check-in later. That's important. That's really important.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I am about to jump into some questions, and I just want to let the audience know that if you would like to ask any questions for the panelists yourselves, just be sure to type them into the chat and we will get to them. But the first question I'm going to ask is, I'm going to first direct it to Jerry, and then any other panelists are welcome to chime in on this. But I want to ask you, how do you believe that moving to a cloud environment has helped you to remain nimble and adapt in 2020 to meet your mission objectives?
Moving to the cloud environment really helped immensely, especially at the beginning of this year with having to do a mass telework. We were pretty much migrated to, in our case, O365 for our email and files. So people were able to access them anywhere, anytime as they needed. So that greatly enhanced our ability to move to a telework situation. So that was a big deal. And we spent a lot of time methodically doing that over the past few years. So that really put us over the top. I think some of the mobile solutions we've been going on, we have different flavors, of course, to meet the customer's needs as well, depending on what they do. Of course, there are some challenges that we face. We're not a totally unclassified agency, of course, so there are some things that you need to be on-prem to do. So how do we deal with that? What was challenging? But all in all, moving to the cloud, not having to go rack and stack in our own data center things, we're able to more agilely, to use, for lack of a better term, get things up and running so that people could do their mission, access their files, do their collaborations, do their meetings. We have a couple different flavors to do webinars and meetings virtually, for instance. So, you know, getting soft phones out there. We actually had our help desk all virtually able to answer phones from a virtual cloud PBX, which was a big deal too. We got that up in a short amount of time. So people were taking calls from the help desk at their phone. Desktop people were helping people from their phone, all from a cloud telephone system. So those are some big advantages that we found moving agilely towards those things.
Awesome. Does any other panelists want to chime into that one?
So Kirsten, it's Mike Vanderwood. Just so the cloud is a good subject, and because just before leaving GSA, I had pulled together a lot of the cloud suppliers, et cetera. One of the challenges, especially in smaller agencies, that they're having is doing a proper cost-benefit analysis, or what I call baseline activity-based costing. So understanding what changes when I move to the cloud, so I can get a tighter control, and what we don't do a very good job of. So this is understanding what the impacts in your infrastructure change. So there's capacity, there's network, but then there's the operation things like the help desk and certain applications. So a number of agencies have moved to the cloud and then backed off the cloud. Only because of latency, meaning the time for when you hit the send key till you get a response, and application interdependency. So if an agency moves a specific application and it's pulling data from multiple applications, it creates other problems. So one of the things, what I've suggested and put together, at least for DHS, is to come out with a process with the integrators as well as the cloud service providers to do a better job on the front end of understanding the impact of the change. So those things can be addressed before the migration and not necessarily afterward. So it has nothing to do with our teleworking, but it has to do with complications that we're seeing within the government relative to moving to the cloud.
Yeah, just to camp onto that a little bit there, Mike. I mean, you've kind of highlighted some of the key challenges that I think a lot of federal agencies are dealing with, you know, with the cloud adoption in general. You know, before I came to SBA, I was over at OMB, you know, and when we were writing the Cloud Smart strategy, you know, we tried to address some of these things that agencies are struggling with. You know, the latency issue has been a major one under the old TIC. The new Trusted Internet Connection memo allows for a lot more flexibility than ever before, so we can remove some of these like choke points that agencies currently are still using, the old MTIPS method, the castle and moat. You know, that's been a major issue, and I think that having that memo come out just, you know, a little ways before we had this emergency hit was kind of provident in a lot of ways, because we are able to adapt a new methodology. And so the other piece, I mean, the cost is a huge issue. Agencies still don't understand the cost of cloud. I'll put a plug in here. We have a cloud working group here at ATARC, and we're working on cost modeling, which has been a really great conversation. And if you're interested in that, I recommend you join. But plug aside, I mean, figuring out your total cost of ownership is not easy for any agency. And I see every agency doing it wrong over and over again. You know, when I was sitting on my OMB seat overlooking the entire federal cloud portfolio, the numbers are kind of wildly different at every single agency, even for similar products and similar solutions. So when you're thinking about your TCO, the CIO Council came out with an application rationalization playbook that we worked on that was pretty fantastic there, and GSA had a big hand in that, and really thinking about not just the cost of your storage, your compute, your network, but thinking about, you know, your training costs, thinking about moving from having, you know, data center engineers to SREs, which are about twice as expensive for the federal government. Really doing that full TCO is critical to being able to really make sure you're budgeting appropriately. And not everything needs to move to the cloud. I'm just going to say, quite frankly, you know, some things are fine kept on-prem. Hybrid, multi-cloud, this is the world that the federal government is going to live in for the foreseeable future. And we just need to embrace that and realize that some things can move and some things can't. And a lot of that comes down to congressional budgets as much as will.
Great. Thank you, Bill. Thank you for that insight.
Sure. Hey, Kirsten, I just wanted to jump on because the two last gentlemen mentioned a couple things. So here at the Department of State, of course, and I'm going to put a shameless plug in for ATARC too, not shameless though. I lead the TIC 3.0 working group for ATARC as well. So we have some vendors, and we're going to put up a proof of concept lab. We're working on the logistics of that. But one of the things I'm directly doing at the Department of State, I'm actually doing an overseas TIC pilot with a certain vendor, because the last gentleman mentioned TIC. you know, we backhaul everything from all over the world. And, you know, I'm in some places where infrastructure is pretty much negligent, but we're still able to do cloud. So it's been pretty challenging, but we're looking at unique ways, you know, to address those latency issues. Like, is there a close meet-me place where I can offload to a cloud fabric? Is there a meet-me place where I can pop out to the internet, or can I pop out directly from where I'm at and still get the advantages and the security and the telemetry of doing so? So, you know, anybody that's interested, we should are working on that proof of concept to put up a lab so we can show the use cases for TIC. But yeah, latency, I know more than anybody what latency is like, especially when you have some of these countries in Africa, but you still have to, you're utilizing the cloud. So it can be done, and there's some unique things, but I think like you said, TIC 3.0, I think, you know, the sky's the limit with that, there's some solutions and some flexibilities there to address these kind of things.
Great, thank you for adding to that, and thank you guys for plugging the ATARC working groups. So the next question I'm going to ask is going to be directed towards Mike. So you mentioned that GSA has been teleworking for quite some time, so you all are probably a little bit more ahead of the rest of them at this point. Can you elaborate on what the biggest challenges and blockers to remote work productivity and collaboration for federal government agencies is, and how do you see getting around them? So maybe some lessons learned.
Well, the one thing I did learn is that you telework on Mondays and Fridays because it's like an echo chamber at 1800F on Mondays and Fridays. People generally who are teleworking spend Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays at the office. So you kind of manage your calendar that way. The other challenge is, you know, you don't have assigned seating. You don't have a room. It's an open building, right? The only offices you have are conference rooms, and you have to reserve conference rooms. So it's all of those challenges. You actually have to reserve the seat you're going to sit in. And we kind of channel the divisions where there's a commonality between it, like the telecom group, et cetera, et cetera. The organizations will kind of find their place within the building and pretty much book their seating that way. But I think that the technology has really helped us immensely in teleworking. You know, things like blockchain and stuff like that, where now, you know, it's one of the things we're talking about teleworking, about being able to do our business, but now you can have a conference call with your supplier, your reseller, your integrator. You can have it with the program manager, the contracting officer, the core, all at once. Typically, trying to get all of those people into a room to have a productive meeting was a real challenge. I find that trying to first of all, you're looking at everybody's calendar. So you can make those arrangements and make sure that you're scheduling those kind of meetings. I found on the cloud side, a real benefit to having the integrator in with the cloud service provider, because that's where the real breakdown has occurred in terms of what is the integrator doing that will help me move to the cloud without all of the implications of you know, doing the latency between applications and things of that nature. All of those things with the program manager have really been outstanding. So I think from a negative side, I think, as I've said, is trying to make sure when you are in the building, you're in the building with people that you typically want to see and communicate with. But all of that being said, what we've done over the last 90 days, even that's not a significant event. You can do these calls and get everybody you need on the call and conduct yourselves in a very positive way. You can, as I said, with blockchain, with just looking at the same documents, with having the commonality with your supplier and the program manager, you're actually doing it better than what you would if you had just invited people into the building.
Great, thank you. Does anybody else want to chime in on that? Okay, well, I have another question, and this one is going to be directed towards Bill. So you mentioned before that you guys were maximizing on your cloud technologies. So the question that I want to ask you is, can you speak to your ongoing efforts to optimize your remote work productivity and collaborative work management? But also, what tools have been most effective in supporting this effort?
Sure, absolutely. And I'll try and see if I can't tie this into some of the questions that have popped up in the chat around this issue as well. Obviously, I don't want to name specific vendors that we're using, but I think everybody is somewhat aware of what we've been doing. We've been talking about it in the media pretty widely. I think anybody who's been following SBA at all knows that we've been one of the leading agencies when it comes to adopting cloud and being very cloud forward. In our thinking. You know, we were one of the TIC pilot groups. We've been doing innovative things with CDM that other agencies have not started doing yet in many cases. You know, we've been really leading the pack on having end-to-end cloud adoption and moving as rapidly as we can to using cloud tools for everything that we do. And to that end, it's made the ability to scale rapidly in this new environment really effective for us. So, I mean, the obvious things that everyone's already doing, you know, using collaborative tools and suites, you know, whatever that your product of choice is, whether that's Zoom, whether that's Teams, whether that's Google Docs and Drive and Hangouts, whatever it is that you're doing, that's going to be sort of the entry level. Moving towards thinking about how you're handling security, thinking about how you're actually onboarding your staff, those sorts of things. That's going to be sort of the next stages. How do you actually bake in your tools into your processes? So at SBA, for instance, with all of these new staff we have coming on board, not everybody's going to be able to get a PIV card on day one, right? If you're hiring in 5,000 new staff, we're not equipped to give every single human a PIV card immediately. That's just kind of like the standard tool that most agencies are using for authentication. So instead, we're looking at things like single-use tokens using authentication tools, you know, MFA as an alternative method to allow people to onboard rapidly has been really successful. So they can get a secure access into our systems without necessarily having that physical card that's been printed and their photo on it, right? You know, another thing that we've been using really widely is virtual desktop. Being able to stand up a virtualized environment for, say, some of these thousands of contractors we're bringing on board, where they're basically treated as if they're inside of our network, but don't have to have a government issued device, can be extremely powerful. You know, it was mentioned the help centers, and we also have other types of call centers that we stand up. And a lot of our staff are using a virtual environment for all of that call center work. So they're basically just can plug in whatever laptop that they've been issued by their company and immediately be inside of our network, you know, through a secure connection using a multi-factor authentication so that we know who they are, we know what they're doing, but we don't have to go and, you know, mail them a laptop or send them a phone. They can use, you know, a soft phone. They can use, you know, virtual calling, VoIP, all of these sorts of technologies, and baking that into kind of how you do business. So those people aren't treated like, you know, a second class member of your staff, but that becomes a primary method by which you do your work. That's been extremely valuable and has just led to us to be able to scale at an unprecedented rate. You know, there's a question in chat here about talking about during hurricane season. Obviously, hurricane season on top of a pandemic is extremely concerning. But thankfully, the methodologies that we've kind of put in place for collaboration, for communication, for onboarding, for offboarding, all of these same methodologies we'll be reusing throughout hurricane season and whatever other emergencies that we're having to deal with.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you for answering that question. And do any of the panelists have any comments that they would like to make? Okay. Well, one question that I would like to specifically direct to Chris is, looking outside the Beltway, how have Smartsheet's state and local customers adapted to maintaining operations during this pandemic?
That's a great question. In mid-March, when the pandemic arose, we actually offered our Smartsheet Gov solution to our federal or government customers at no charge if they were responding to COVID, and obviously out in the state and local market a little bit closer to the citizenry and different set of challenges than a lot of federal organizations have, you know, in terms of providing vital citizen services when you don't have brick and mortar locations anymore. And it was pretty remarkable watching some of the innovation that took place out there. I think the primary thing we saw is we have a forms data capture capability where people can bring in lots of data and applications for various things. If you think about small business interruption loans and things like that, Bill, calls for volunteers, medical supply donations, identifying who essential workers are. And these are all things that, you know, just a month earlier, none of these organizations had any idea they were going to need to do any of this. And there are, you know, a number of our state and local customers that really use that data collection capability, you know, and we're able to get that out there. And I'm assuming they were working from home, but become a lot more productive and gather a lot of data and information that they needed to have from businesses and from citizens and those sorts of things. One of our customers, Santa Barbara County, if you go look on their website in terms of their reopening schedule, uses a Smartsheet dashboard on their publicly facing website that, you know, basically talks about the number of new cases, hospitalizations, and all those sorts of things. So we did see some very, very innovative things going on out in the state and local world as this was going on as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing the answer to that. Alyssa, I think it might be time for our second poll question. Could you please pop that up on the screen for us? Thank you. If everyone could please answer that question. All right, we're probably about ready for the results now. Let's see how confident everyone is. Okay, not bad. What do you guys think about the answer to that one? Decently confident.
You know what, as I look at it, I don't know if I were to sit there before this started, talk about what was going to happen, say that the results would come back what you just saw. I'm not sure I would have predicted that. And I do think it's a testament to, you know, A, preparedness by a number of agencies, B, a lot of quick thinking by a number of others, right? I mean, I saw at one point that the CIO Council, instead of meeting monthly, was meeting every single day, right? To talk about ideas and collaboration and, you know, what's agency B doing that I could, you know, that I could benefit from. So, yeah, like I said, I think if I were to look at it in the lens of prior to the pandemic, I'm not sure I would have said that the response rate, you know, over 60% would be satisfied.
And that kind of ties into actually one of our audience questions, which is, how long would you recommend that the stand-up check-in should be and how often? So this may vary, you know, from agency to agency, organization to organization, department to department, but what are you guys' thoughts on that?
I mean, I'm a software engineer by trade, so we call them stand-ups because everyone, if you're able, should be standing up, and therefore by the time your legs get tired, that's usually an indication that your meeting has gone too long.
I like that.
Yeah. So, you know, keeping things terse, keeping things short, making sure that you're just, you know, sharing information. You know, I tend to like to do the methodology of, if you're going to do dailies, just go over like fires and blockers. And then you can have like a weekly where you check in and talk about some of the deeper, more pervasive issues, but that way you keep things moving. You know, at SBA, we had a couple of different stand-ups with different groups where, you know, the lower level reporting of fires and blockers then bubbled up to the top levels. So you kind of had progressive meetings throughout the day. So information was getting shared. But like I said, having asynchronous communication where people can go to a single source of truth and know this is where I go to find out what's going on with these projects is way more valuable and useful. And that allows you to keep these meetings terse and short. And that way, if everybody has documented all of their issues, you know, in a single place, whether that's in chat, whether that's in a Word doc, whether that's in a project management tool, whatever you're using, that saves you from a lot of talking time where people are saying basic information that you can just kind of go read, and kind of puts the onus back on the leadership to check in on areas where they think is important to have that sort of communication. I'll again call out Mike and GSA. They do a fantastic job of this. A lot of their teams, because they're remote first, do like daily stand-ups that are all virtual, all over text. They don't even do video chat for all of them. And that's wildly, wildly successful, not just for software teams, but for regular teams doing project program mission work.
Very nice.
I think, yeah, I think Bill hit on something important there, right? The number of meetings that you really need to have to just do status checkups and those sorts of things should be minimal if you have the systems that provide that data to people on an ongoing basis. I won't name the agency, but we're working with an agency where the administrator actually came from private industry. And after he had been there for 3 months, he went to his team and he said, I don't understand why I have to have so many meetings to find out what's going on. When I was in private industry, I had systems and reports and dashboards that I could look at. And when we had meetings, which was a lot less frequently, it was to talk about real issues and things like that. It wasn't to get updates on things we could get from somewhere else. So.
Very interesting. So another question that we have from the audience, it's a little bit specific, but I think it could be applied to everyone, is if workers had a tour of duty, would the panelists recommend that managers require teleworkers to continue on, or should that be adjusted as long as the workers are getting projects completed? So I'm thinking, you know, does it matter how many hours they're working versus what they're actually getting done in the time allotted for their work?
I mean, that's a fantastic question. I think we're kind of addressing a little bit of the elephant in the room here, which is this isn't normal telework. All right, this is a global pandemic. This is a major international disaster that we are dealing with right now. And simultaneously here in the U.S., you know, we're also dealing with seeing increasing, you know, violence happening of, you know, the police attacking our citizens simultaneously. And if you live in a major city, you're not blind to that and what's going on here. Expecting regular productivity out of people during unusual, extreme circumstances is not realistic, and everybody needs to be aware of that. If you are a federal agency, if you're a private company, it doesn't matter. These are not normal times. And you have to factor that in when you're setting expectations about what you are and are not going to get done, when you're setting reasonable guidelines around when it can get done. You know, SBA, I can say that we've been a little unique because we've had all of these demands from Congress, and we're trying to do our best to keep the American economy rolling. It's pretty much like being in a startup, again, for me, where people are working, you know, 80-hour weeks just to get stuff done and make sure that we keep our systems rolling. But you can't do that sustainably. You can't do that forever. For average agencies, if you don't have to have crunch time, then you shouldn't necessarily be expecting that people are going to do 40 hours in a week. And so if your staff are more productive, whether they're contractors or detailees, whatever they are, if they're getting their work done and you're still delivering and you're setting reasonable expectations about what can get done and when, I don't think it matters if they're not in the office, if they're on a tour of duty. I don't think those are really the things you should be looking at. It's really more about the communication and keeping in mind that your workers are people. We're all humans here. You know, there's another question in there about talking about dealing with childcare. Most everybody that's being impacted by this, you know, if you've got kids at home, you're having to manage them, and they're going to come running into the room during your status calls. And that's just part of the life that we're in now. And you just have to accept that as the new norm and the new reality. And again, just be humble, be realistic, be empathetic, and understand that people are going through some shit right now.
Yep, we're all in this together. Does anybody else want to comment on that?
Yeah. One thing I think, you know, we're all techies here, and we talk technology a lot, but you know, there is a human aspect. You know, these kind of times, you know, introverts like me, I love it. You know, I don't have somebody coming to my office all the time. But that is the thing. We are human beings, and you know, the interaction that we get when we see people face to face, and that social interaction is just different now. When you're always doing it through technology. You know, I've given, like right now, you know, if I'm giving a presentation or something, I don't see the audience. I can't get feedback, you know, how they're receiving that kind of thing. You know, those kind of things, with the body language that we get out of meetings and things. You know, so I think sometimes you got to take that into account. I've read some articles as well, you know, is some people that are extroverts or whatever, they feel a bit depressed in these kind of times because they don't have that social interaction. Some people look forward to going to the job and seeing, you know, their work friends and socializing a little bit. So there's that aspect that I think we're kind of losing, that we got to figure out, you know, how to have that, you know, social balance in this kind of time.
Absolutely. One question that I would like to ask each of the panelists, we can start with Mike, is what is your outlook on federal remote work productivity and collaborative work management for 2020 and beyond?
Well, I think it's, as I said in the beginning, I think that if we hadn't had COVID-19, I'm not sure things would be progressing as rapidly as they are. I think the experience that everybody has gained through this challenge is that, you know, the experience is, or has been, is that a lot more people can actually telework, be more productive, be happier, you know, whether you have to take the dog out or address, you know, the complications with children, all of those things, you just subtract what the time I would be commuting, right? So you take all of that time. I just think that the technology is changing rapidly, as you see what 5G is going to do in terms of endpoint technology and the changes that we're going to see from that. The capabilities that we have today, these are all pluses, and I think that the challenges for those that have experienced a lot of teleworking, it's not something that you just transition to tomorrow and everything is okay. It's a learning process. It's a different communication skill. It's a different way to handle documents and things of that nature. But the advantages, I think, far outweigh the disadvantages. And I think that we'll see a lot of changes within the next couple of years.
Great, thank you. And Bill, would you like to connect?
I mean, I just strongly agree with everything Mike said. You know, it's really about building that muscle memory, building the culture, and doing the necessary changes in your organization so you can support it. You know, and just understanding all the bits and pieces there. You know, like it's above and beyond just being able to share files at the end of the day. It's really that culture change. So I just +1 everything you just said.
Awesome. Jerry, any final thoughts?
Yeah, all kinds of thoughts, but no, you know, I see a lot of good questions still lingering out there, but these are different times. I think there's going to be a new normal. I think we're going to adapt and overcome. There's going to be some, you know, hard questions to answer as we go through these things. Again, you know, I come from a very strong, even though I'm an infrastructure and operations person, security is at the forefront of my mind when approaching these things. I've seen some bad implementations. I've seen some good implementations. There's a lot of lessons learned. There's a lot of learning to still be done as we adopt and embrace these technologies further. So I would just say, go forward smartly as you adopt these things and make these part of your new normal.
Great, thank you. And Chris, we're just about out of time. Is there anything that you would like to leave us with?
No, just thank the panelists. I think my comment on the final question there is it is going to bring about some interesting observations in terms of how people go about work. I read an article the other day that said HR and IT are going to be a lot more closely linked because as there's a lot more remote workers, their ability to execute and what they're using is going to become a discerning category for potential employees and things like that, right? And what are the tools and things like that they're going to be able to use. So I do think, obviously it's been a difficult time, but there will be some evolutions that come out of this.
Awesome.
Kirsten, just one more thought that I wanted to share. One of the things that I learned over the last couple of months, right? So if you go back to the Iran situation, where we were concerned about the impact if they attacked either power plants or something else in the US. One of the things that impacts us significantly is contingency recovery planning. And we don't do a very good job in our contracts in terms of simple things like a call tree on strategic systems, right? So if I'm losing a strategic system, like if you go to the cloud and somebody blows up AWS's data center, who's calling who? Is it the reseller calling me? Is it the integrator calling me? Is it the cloud service provider? If I'm the IT guy that's managing that infrastructure, those things need to be known and they need to be documented. So one of the things about teleworking is to make sure that those plans are in place and tested periodically.
Excellent. Thank you, Mike. So unfortunately, this is all the time that we have. This hour flew by. I just want to say, if you're interested, please join us for our weekly webinar next Thursday, July 9th, as we invite a few CIOs to discuss the framework for dealing with a crisis such as the pandemic. We will also be hosting an ITC Acquisition Summit July 14th through the 16th. So go ahead and register now to hear some of the top speakers in DevOps, cloud, security, and AI. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you so much to all of our wonderful panelists, and we hope that everyone has a safe and happy 4th of July weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.